the argument. Now, I encourage anybody who doesn't want to use the word racist to come up and come up with some constructive ideas on how we get through this situation. I'm all ears. Come to my house, I'll make a pot of coffee, we'll have some cake, and we'll talk about it just like we do everything else. But the one thing Parsippany Troy Hills doesn't need from this citizen's perspective, this taxpayer's perspective, this father of three who has been living in this town since 1990, is we don't need to come in here and because we don't like what is said or what is written to run around, go to council meetings or any other type of meetings and screen racism. You're a bad person. Your opinion doesn't agree with mine. That's not how this country was founded, unless, of course, I missed that part in high school. That is not what I believe. And when I run for an office, I sit and I listen and I take everything in and I try to make informed decisions. Once again, stating for the record, I am a Parsippany Board of Education member. I was elected into this position. I am speaking for myself as a taxpayer and as a father of three. I do not represent the board, nor do I represent the district. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you. My name is Carol Ruiz. I'm here in my capacity as co-president of the Wind of the Spirit Immigrant Resource Center and as a volunteer with Wind of the Spirit Immigrant Resource Center. And I'm here to offer our services and maybe take up Mr. Barrios for that invitation to coffee and cake. I love cake. And as long as it's not snowing, maybe we'll have some coffee and cake today to talk about our rights to our own opinions and our need to respect the facts. As this council knows better than I, Parsippany is not a sanctuary city. Parsippany has not passed a fair and welcoming community policy packet, which is New Jersey's version of a policy that would protect not just immigrants, but all of our vulnerable residents. The Fair and Welcoming Community Policy Packet, which if you're interested, you can get from the New Jersey Alliance for Immigrant Justice, of which Wind of the Spirit is a member. We also include members from unions. I think we had some union members speak earlier, and members from legal organizations such as the ACLU or the AFSC, which is the Quaker organization, American Friends Service Committee. And this policy packet ensures that a community is safer and welcoming to everyone. People with developmental disabilities who may be, if any of you have family members or friends who have suffered through developmental disabilities, including autism, for example, sometimes these symptoms include angry outbursts that, if you're not familiar with developmental disabilities, could lead to very dangerous interactions with the police. So the Fair and Welcoming Community Policy Packet, for example, would ensure that our community authorities, that the police department was well trained in how to respond to crisis for people with developmental disabilities. The Fair and Welcoming Community Policy Packet would also protect, similarly, people with mental illness. Again, some illnesses like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or OCD can present in ways that could be misunderstood as violent, and it's truly the person struggling with their own illness. So training in how to respond to such illnesses is part of the policy packet. Of course, it also protects immigrant communities. We heard from our neighbor here, Karan, who has been in this community, as many of us have. Parsippany is home to Indian immigrants, Pakistani immigrants, immigrants from Colombia, immigrants from all over the world, and children of immigrants from Italy and Ireland, and possibly maybe even some Native Americans, given the lakes in the area, right? Some of us may even go that far back. So the fair and welcoming community policy is something that is often talked about and misnamed as sanctuary, and there is something to be said about sanctuary. As I mentioned, I'm a volunteer attorney with Fair and Welcome, with the Wind of the Spirit Immigrant Resource Center, and we recently provided, I guess what we could call sanctuary to a woman that was a victim of human trafficking, slavery, right here in Parsippany. And it does happen right here in Parsippany. A member of the Church of Latter-day Saints brought a woman to our center who was held against her will, who was forced to work, who was not paid, who was verbally abused, and who was beaten right here in Parsippany. We also had another community member from here in Parsippany who their documents were stolen and they were kicked out of their home. Not exactly human trafficking because they weren't forced to work, but certainly exploitation. So Parsippany is home to immigrants and is welcoming and is beautiful and is also a place that is in need of protection for the vulnerable friends and neighbors we have. Sadly, our Jewish neighbors, our Muslim neighbors may also be subject to anti-Semitism or...
Please keep it down back there.
Thank you, Council President. Our Jewish neighbors and our Muslim neighbors who may be subject to anti-Semitism or hate speech because they either are or are perceived to be Muslims. So I appreciate you listening to me and you listening to the community, and I appreciate the call to ensure we know the facts. We can debate immigration all day over coffee, over cake, and we can do so without using dehumanizing and criminalizing speech. No human being is illegal, right? It was actually, that's the call of Wind of the Spirit. We talk about no human being is illegal, but it was actually a call made by an author and an amazing human rights advocate and survivor of the Holocaust that you may be familiar with. You
30 seconds.
Thank you, President. You may have read in school, Eli Wiesel. He talked about no human being is illegal. Some of you may have some Irish last names, so you may remember or have heard stories from your ancestors about a time when, Irish need not apply and the Irish were discriminated against. We all share that history. We all know that history, and as the Quran called us to do, it's time for us to move forward. And I encourage you to look for the facts. We at Wind of the Spirit are at your service. We have workshops, community forums. We can educate you about the policy, about ways that you can ensure that your community knows the facts, and that you can continue to be a unified, loving, welcoming community and even get better at it, because there's always room to get better and progress. Thank you.
Anyone else? See no. Nope. Good.
Hello, Town Council. My name is Robert Vasquez. I live on 55 Reservoir Road. I've been a Parsippany resident my entire life, and from what I'm hearing, sitting in the back, is that we're kind of dealing on hypotheticals right now. The mayor has not made a clear and concise statement on whether Parsippany is going to be a sanctuary city or not. He has not made a clear and concise statement on whether we're going to be using 287G or make that compact with the federal government, and nor is the town council. I think it's about time that that the mayor and the town council goes on official record on whether we're going to be a sanctuary town and what our next steps forward are going to be, because everything else is just hypotheticals and just following op-ed pieces. We need our elected officials to come out and make statements and make our actual policy going forward, because right now it's just bitter talking about nothing. We're really talking about no actual policy, and I think it's time that we do something about it and make a line in the ground. And whether we're going to follow it or not. So, just from what I'm hearing, I haven't heard anything concrete yet, and I'm calling on Mayor Soriano and the Town Council to make a clear and concise statement on whether Parsippany is going to be a sanctuary town or not. Thank you.
Hello, I am Teresa Marquila. I live at 22 Shawnee Parkway in Jefferson Township. In addition to being a volunteer with Wind of the Spirit, I'm also the chair of the Green Party of Morris County. My vice chair lives here in Parsippany, but he had to work tonight, so he couldn't be here. But we have other members here, and I have friends here, so I speak for all of them. Every time I come to Parsippany, I am greeted warmly with a lot of welcoming from people of various different countries, different religions, different cultures, and I really appreciate that about Parsippany. It's a beautiful place. I love it here. But I'm getting really tired of hearing the rhetoric about immigrants and about sanctuary cities. And I think that I really hope that you will take up Carol's offer of help from Wind of the Spirit before you make any statements, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of statements about undocumented immigrants being a tax burden. They pay taxes. They do not get benefits. They're helping us. They're building communities with us. They're our friends and neighbors. They're not committing crimes. Actually, they're committing crimes at less of a rate than native-born Americans. 287G is an extreme waste of money. It's very expensive to run the program, to make sure that you have the facilities, and it doesn't really do any good. And we also want to bear in mind the reasons why people come here without documentation. Quite often it's our own foreign policy and militaries that are destroying their countries and sending them here. They're starving, they're in fear for their lives, they're in poverty, and they don't really have a lot of choices. And I think any one of us would do the same if it was our children at risk. It's not a criminal offense for them to be here, it's also a civil offense. And I'm sure a lot of people who have committed their own civil offenses here, I know that the majority of people in New Jersey that I've seen speed quite frequently, which is much more of a threat to people than undocumented immigrants. I'm an immigrant myself. I came here from Canada, and I don't see myself as any different from my friends, documented or not, from Honduras, from Colombia, from Mexico, from Syria, from Afghanistan. I spent a lot of time with these people, and I hope that everyone here will spend some time with them as well and get to know them and get to know why they're here and what they offer us before we make any decisions. And I also love coffee and cake, by the way, for the gentleman that offered it, and would love to have a conversation with you as well. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Judy Hernandez, 5 Marine Road, Morris. Well, Parsippany.
Yeah.
I agree with a lot of what people had to say here today. I agree that people can make their own.
Can you just speak up?
I'm sorry, it sounds
that.
loud to me. Okay, I do agree with what a lot of people have to say here today about the immigrant population, about whether we should call these people racist or not racist, about people having their own opinion. My point at the BOE meeting and today is that letters that come out in Parsippany, and we're addressing the climate in Parsippany, that are not factual are a problem. We're talking about sanctuary cities. We're talking about the immigration or illegals and undocumented committing crimes, and there was never any say by the current administration that anything was changing. Am I correct? Has anything changed since Fiore, Luther, Mimi Latz? Has anything changed, Barbario, in the last few years the way our police handle immigrants in this town? I don't think so. So why is it that they're talking about this all the time? They're talking about it online, and yes, Mr. Zicki, they are talking about it, and it's not just a few people. and it's misinformation, and it's wrong information. And yes, I do think that maybe somebody should get out in front of this because it just has legs, and it's being spread, these false statements about Parsippany and its status. The gentleman did say that before, and he's right, but there's nobody's towing the line or wondering what we're going to do. There hasn't been anything said about changing anything here on Parsippany. And that was why there was a lot of people at the BOE meeting, and people brought their feelings, because it's very emotional to talk about immigration. It's very emotional to get up and speak in front of people. I don't like doing it. I don't like being here in the evening at 10 o'clock. But I do feel like silence equals complicity. And if you let misinformation stand, that's what people will believe is the truth. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? All right, see no one else come forward, entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
Motion?
Second, Grignani.
Motion made by Mrs. Peterson, seconded by Mrs. Grignani. Roll call, Mr. DePiero.
Yes.
Ms. Grignani.
Yes.
Ms. McCarthy.
Yes.
Ms. Peterson.
Yes.
Mr. Carriffy.
Yes.
Floor is closed.
Mr. DePiero?
Ordinance for introduction. Ordinance number 2018:03. An ordinance to make conforming technical corrections to Chapter 329-14 sewer connection fees and Chapter 445-78 water connection fees and capacity charges of the Code of the Township of Parsippany Troy Hills, Morris County, New Jersey. Be it resolved that the above ordinance be introduced, read by title, and passed on first reading at a meeting to be held at a meeting of the Township Council of the Township of Parsippany Troy Hills held on March 20th, 2018, and that said ordinance be further considered for a second reading and final passage at a meeting to be held on April 17th, 2018, at 7:30 p.m. prevailing time, or as soon thereafter as the matter may be reached at the municipal building in said township, at which time all persons interested shall be given an opportunity to be heard concerning said ordinance. Be it further resolved that the clerk be authorized and directed to advertise said ordinance with the notice of introduction thereof being published in the official newspaper according to law. Motion to approve the above resolution.
Second?
Motion made by Mr. DePiero, seconded by Mrs. Peterson. Roll call, Mr. DePiero.
Yes.
Ms. Grignani.
Yes.
Ms. McCarthy.
Yes.
Ms. Peterson.
Yes.
Mr. Carriffy.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, second reading and public hearing, Ms. McCarthy.
Ordinance number 2018:01, an ordinance of the Township of Parsippany Troy Hills, Morris County, New Jersey, amending Chapter 405, Vehicles and Traffic, Section 11, stopping or standing prohibited on certain streets of the Code of the Township of Parsippany Troy Hills in the County of Morris, New Jersey. The notice for the ordinance above was published in the Daily Record, the official newspaper of the Township of Parsippany Troy Hills, on February 26, 2018. This ordinance was introduced at the February 20th, 2018 agenda meeting. Motion to accept that ordinance 2018:01 be heard in its second and final reading by title only. Motion.
Second?
Motion made by Mrs. McCarthy, seconded by Ms. Peterson. Roll call, Mr. DePiero.
Yes.
Ms. Grignani.
Yes.
Ms. McCarthy.
Yes.
Ms. Peterson.
Yes.
Mr. Carriffy.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Public hearing 2018:01. Motion to open the public hearing for ordinance 2018:01.
Second.
Motion made by Mrs. McCarthy, seconded by Mr. DePiero. Roll call, Mr. DePiero.
Yes.
Ms. Grignani.
Yes.
Ms. McCarthy.
Yes.
Ms. Peterson.
Yes.
Mr. Carriffy.
Yes.
The floor is open to speak on this ordinance only, if anyone would like to say anything.
Okay, see no one come forward, entertain a motion to close the public hearing for this ordinance.
Motion.
Second?
Motion made by Mr. DePiero, seconded by Mrs. Peterson. Roll call, Mr. DePiero.
Yes.
Ms. Grignani.
Yes.
Ms. McCarthy.
Yes.
Ms. Peterson.
Yes.
Mr. Carriffy.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Whereas the above ordinance was read in title on the second reading and a hearing held thereon Now therefore it be resolved that said ordinance be passed on final reading and that a notice of the final passage of said ordinance be published in the newspaper according to the law. Motion to approve this resolution?
Second, Grignani.
Motion made by Mrs. McCarthy, seconded by Mrs. Grignani. Roll call, Mr. DePiero.
Yes.
Ms. Grignani.
Yes.
Ms. McCarthy.
Yes.
Ms. Peterson.
Yes.
Mr. Carriffy.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Ordinance 2018-02, an ordinance of the Township Council of the Township of Parsippany of Troy Hills, County of Morris, State of New Jersey, amending and supplementing Chapter 290, Parks and Recreation Areas and Public Lands, Article 1, Motor Vehicles, Fees, Section 290-4, Knoll Country Club Utility Fees, and Chapter A 455, Fees, Compilation, Section A 445-37, Knoll Country Club Utility of the Code of the Township of Parsippany Troy Hills in the County of Morris, New Jersey. The notice for the ordinance above was published in the Daily Record, the official newspaper of the Township of Parsippany Troy Hills, on February 26, 2018. This ordinance was introduced at the February 20th, 2018 agenda meeting. Motion to accept that ordinance 2018-02 be heard in its second and final reading by title only by myself, second by
Second.
Motion made by Mrs. Peterson, seconded by Mrs. McCarthy. Roll call, Mr. DePiero.
Yes.
Ms. Grignani.
Yes.
Ms. McCarthy.
Yes.
Ms. Peterson.
yes.
Mr. Carriffy.
Yes.
Roll call, motion passes.
Public hearing 2018-02. Motion to open the public hearing for ordinance 2018-02 by myself, second.
Grignani.
Motion made by Mrs. Peterson, seconded by Mrs. Grignani. Roll call, Mr. DePiero.
Yes.
Ms. Grignani.
Yes.
Ms. Ms. McCarthy.
Yes.
Ms. Peterson.
Yes.
Mr. Carriffy.
Yes.
The floor is open to speak on this ordinance only.
Nicholas Homiak, Lake Hiawatha. I have one question. When I looked over there, it says there was included in it fees and everything was taxes. Are those taxes paid back to the municipality or back to the state, or what type of tax is that? It was in the, it had all the prices for everything, and then I saw taxes. I didn't bring the paper with me. I
That would
thought
be
I
the
had it in
sales
that
and use
bag.
tax. That would be the sales and use tax.
And that goes to the municipality?
That goes to the state.
And nothing comes back to the municipality from taxes?
Not from the sales tax, that's correct.
Is that normal for that? Yeah, there's no...
It is, yeah. The services provided at the Knoll are like any other retail service. It's subject to the sales tax.
And there's nothing in that concerning that job that was supposedly up for the golf pro? That's not included in...
I think
No,
that's
that
an
doesn't have
unrelated
anything to do
issue.
with
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, see no one else come forward, entertain a motion to close the public hearing on this ordinance?
Motion?
Second, Grignani.
Motion made by Mrs. Peterson, seconded by Mrs. Grignani. Roll call, Mr. DePiero.
Yes.
Ms. Grignani.
Yes.
Ms. McCarthy.
Yes.
Ms. Peterson.
Yes.
Mr. Carriffy.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Whereas the above ordinance was read in title on second reading and a hearing held thereon, now it therefore be it resolved that the ordinance be passed on final reading and that a notice of final passage of said ordinance be published in the newspaper according to law. Motion to approve the resolution by myself, second.
Grignani.
Motion made by Mrs. Peterson, seconded by Mrs. Grignani. Roll call, Mr. DePiero.
Yes.
Ms. Grignani.
Yes.
Ms. McCarthy.
Yes.
Ms. Peterson.
Yes.
Mr. Carriffy.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Mr. DePiero?
Council President, since there's been so much discussion on my resolution, if you don't mind, I'd like to read it again because there are people here that did not hear it. And second of all, I'd like to preface it with a couple of statements.
Go ahead.
Those that were pro-recreational marijuana are saying it's not harmful, it doesn't do any damage. There are studies, and I'll quote one of them. It's from the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. And they did a pretty thorough study, and I can't pretend to understand a lot of it. It's a medical journal, it's a technical journal. But the statement I made when I introduced this ordinance was prenatal, perinatal, and neonatal exposure. And that this substance, if taken enough times, alcohol is water soluble, so your body dissipates everything you've drank, and within 7 hours it's out of your body, it's gone. But marijuana, the component in there, THC, is fat soluble. That is absorbed by the fat cells in your body, and it stays there for a very long time. And the second time you smoke, you get more, it builds up, it's accumulative in your body. This can affect young people, and it definitely affects pregnant people or women who expect to become pregnant. It affects them. And I'm just going to read you 3 conclusions, since I can't read the whole article. There is substantial evidence of a statistical association between maternal cannabis smoking and lower birth weight of the offspring. There is limited evidence of a statistical association between maternal cannabis smoking and pregnancy complications for the mother, admission of the infant to neonatal intensive care unit. The reason there is limited evidence is because the issue is so complicated. How much has the mother been smoking? How potent was the drug, the TNC? How was she using other drugs in conformance with this, alcohol or other drugs? All of these things make it inconclusive. So there have been thalidomide babies and babies with missing limbs that were born, but they can't positively attribute it to the marijuana. It may have been a contributing factor, but according to this, it's limited evidence. It's not positive evidence. So, again, this ordinance that I'm introducing is only recreational marijuana. Medicinal marijuana, I fully support. I wish we had more locations for it to be dispensed, and I wish some of the restrictions would be lifted so that more people could avail themselves of it that really need it for medicinal purposes. Well, yeah, that's the closest one, right?
Can we have one here in Bridgewater for medical?
I don't know. We don't have one here in Parsippany.
I mean,
Why are you going
No.
back and forth? You can't do
No.
that. Come on.
So I'm going to read the resolution now because some in this room were not here at the last meeting. Proposed resolution opposing the legalization of recreational marijuana. Whereas recent news stories have indicated that the governor of the state of New Jersey will move to legalize recreational marijuana use within his first 100 days in office. And whereas the United States of America outlaws recreational cannabis pursuant to the Controlled Substances Act, 21 U.S.C. Section 811, and whereas only 8 states and the District of Columbia have legalized recreational marijuana, and whereas Colorado, one of the states that legalized recreational marijuana, has seen an increase in documented traffic deaths involving drivers that had used marijuana. In 2013, the year before marijuana was fully legalized in Colorado, there were 55 documented traffic deaths. And in 2016, after it was legalized, the number was 125. Whereas in 2016, the Rocky Mountain high-density drug trafficking area, and I have a big acronym here, annual report shows that the number of medical marijuana centers in Colorado is greater than the number of Starbucks coffee shops, and the number of recreational marijuana outlets is greater than the number of McDonald's restaurants. And whereas and here's the acronym RMHDDTA, which is the Rocky Mountain high-density drug trafficking area, also demonstrates that marijuana use among Colorado teens ages 12 to 17 is 74% above the national average. Whereas the medical marijuana is generally carefully controlled for the amount of delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, whatever that word is, generally referred to as THC, recreational marijuana, on the other hand, is specifically designed to have as much THC as possible. Whereas THC is known to impair physical function in the user, including reaction time while operating the vehicle and the user's ability to perceive danger. And whereas New Jersey utilizes drug recognition experts to determine whether someone is under the influence of a drug, including marijuana, when operating a motor vehicle, and there is no current objective standard for operating under the influence of drugs like marijuana as compared to standards established for driving while intoxicated, 0.08%. And whereas the enforcement of operating a motor vehicle under the influence of drugs such as marijuana is very difficult, and whereas many health officials consider marijuana a gateway drug, and whereas the opiate epidemic is well known to residents of the county of Morris and the state of New Jersey, even though opiates are currently legal and available by prescription and has not been controlled and in fact has become an epidemic. Now therefore be it resolved by the mayor and the council of the township of Parsippany Troy Hills that we oppose the legalization of recreational marijuana use, and be it further resolved that the Parsippany Township Clerk shall forward a certified copy of this resolution to the Governor of the State of New Jersey, Lieutenant Governor of the State of New Jersey, the members of the Morris County Legislative Delegation, all county boards of chosen freeholders, and the mayor and council of all towns within the county of Morris. Council President, I move the resolution.
Second, Grignani.
Motion made by Councilmember DePiero, seconded by Councilmember Grignani.
Can I make a statement, please?
Sure.
On December 27th, 2017, Mr. DiPiero stated here in chambers, quote, "I also disagree with making marijuana legal in the state of New Jersey. I think it is an entrance drug that our kids don't need to have access to, and I'm opposed to it. However, that being said, if we do pass an ordinance making it illegal in the town and the state makes it legal, I do not want the taxpayers of Parsippany to bear the burden of legal costs of fighting the state of New Jersey. So I would slow down any efforts to draft an ordinance that may be superseded." Close quote. For the record, I recognize and acknowledge the difference between an ordinance and a resolution. I also support the carefully considered restrictions on sales as we do for alcohol, tobacco, and other controlled materials and substances. But we know that prohibition does not work. If it did, people would be currently not using illegal drugs, and we wouldn't have repealed the 18th Amendment. But let us not forget, we are not here to argue our thoughts and legislate our feelings and our morals. And no one owns the corner on family ties to addiction. We are all affected. But in council, our feelings are neither here nor there. Our job is to fully understand the legal underpinnings and consequences of our duty, as inconvenient as that may be. By focusing on the law, we will not subject ourselves to an oversimplified binary approach to something so complicated and emotional. Therefore, in the spirit of Mr. DiPiero's December sentiment, I vote no on the grounds that we have not undertaken the work charged to us by the previous administration and council to fully vet and understand the legal ramifications of a prohibition stance and the burden the taxpayers will bear.
I'd like to make a statement as well.
Sure.
You know, it's not uncommon to seek information to support our personal opinions, and that's fine. But when it's a biased, poorly sourced opinion that claims to represent the township, it's not. The only source referenced here, and I quote, and this is from Forbes magazine, as I said, the only source used here is known to filter and slant information to reach a predetermined conclusion. And the conclusions that are refuted here are by far more credible organizations like the American Medical Association and the American Journal of Health. For instance, the AMA, whose study found that opioid deaths and overdose admissions appear to decline where patients have access to legal marijuana. And it may be a promising approach to stem opioid-related deaths. Should we ignore that when 2,300 people died of opioid deaths in New Jersey? This isn't even an original resolution. It's the Monmouth County Freeholders Resolution, and they don't represent Parsippany, and neither should this resolution. This council represents Parsippany, and the town's consensus on this issue was decided on November 7th, 2017. That's when the majority of Parsippany residents voted to elect Governor Murphy. Governor Murphy was quite clear on his position, so it follows that the majority of voters in Parsippany support him in making a determination. That's why people vote. This resolution ignores them. I'm not for or against marijuana, although choosing a position is clearly the intent here. I'm against this resolution. The drug crisis is too serious an issue for political posturing. I recommend we table this resolution.
Councilmember, are you making a motion to table, if I understand you correctly, or
Yes.
you are?
Yes, I am.
Okay, since we already have a motion, the motion to table will supersede that motion at this point, according to Robert's rules. So we'll take that motion, and if that doesn't stand, then Councilmember DePiero's motion will stand. So at this time, is there a second to that motion?
I'll second that.
Okay, so we have a motion by Councilmember McCarthy, seconded by Councilmember Peterson to table this resolution. We'll do a roll call. Mr. DePiero?
No.
Ms. Grignani?
No.
Ms. McCarthy?
No.
Miss
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry, yes.
Ms. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Carriffy?
No.
Okay, so at this point in time, that motion fails. Councilmember DePiero's motion stands. So we have, at this point, a motion for that resolution by Mr. DePiero and a second by Mrs. Grignani. We'll do a roll call. Mr. DePiero?
Yes.
Ms. Grignani?
Yes.
Mrs. McCarthy?
No.
Mrs. Peterson?
No.
Mr. Carriffy?
Okay, before I vote, I just want to say a couple things. To you, sir, my heart goes out to you. I've had many friends fighting cancer pass away from cancer. I fully support medical marijuana. I think we do need to make it so it's more accessible to people like yourself that medically need it, which in turn will do some of the things that the gentleman over there had spoken about when you had got up and done that. Spending over 25 years in law enforcement, I had the unfortunate time of seeing a lot of people that were under the influence of marijuana and seeing how it impairs them. It definitely impairs people. I've seen it firsthand. I've arrested a lot of people for drugs over my 25-year plus career. And again, medical marijuana, fully support it, but recreational, just from what I've seen firsthand, I cannot support recreational marijuana. So I vote yes for this.
So at this time, the resolution passes with 3 votes yes and 2 votes no.
Okay, Ms. McCarthy?
R 2018-045, resolution of the Township Council endorsing Governor Murphy's directive to the Board of Utilities to investigate and hold hearings on how Jersey Central Power and Light responded to the recent winter storms, leaving thousands of township residents without power. Motion to approve the resolution?
Second?
Motion made by Mrs. McCarthy, seconded by Mrs. Peterson. Roll call, Mr. DePiero.
I have a statement to make first. on
Absolutely,
this,
Mr.
okay?
DePiero.
The articles I read, JCP&L had 1,400 telephone poles down and 38 miles of cable to run, hindered by some streets that could not be plowed and allow their trucks to get access to them because of downed trees and wires. They had a monumental job to do, and they even had outside help from other states. Could they have done a better job? Possibly, but they had a monumental job to do, and I don't think we need to kick them in the pants with a resolution. I vote no.
Ms. Grignani?
As was mentioned last week at our meeting, Bravo went to our Parks and Recreation employees, taking down the trees in our area so that Jersey Central Power and Light could come and take care of the wires. We all commented and praised the workers. I don't know if Jersey Central could have done a better job. I know they had outside help, but because of the trees and the other wires coming down, they did the best they could. I will also be voting no on this application.
You voted, what was the vote?
No.
Ms. McCarthy?
Yeah, I agree that they did do they did a good job. They did the best they could do, but I think there's an issue about the timing. Some people were, I don't think people who were out 6 or 7 days would necessarily agree with that. You know, so I'm going to vote yes on this.
Ms. Peters?
This resolution isn't focused on the workers on the ground. This resolution is an opportunity for the governor to investigate the high-level organizational strategy and allow Parsippany to tell its story and be part of the information gathered. So I vote yes.
Mr. Carriffy?
I would have to say, you know, I'd like to see this investigated because I'd like to know if everything was done correctly, if it was done in a timely manner, and if, you know, if it could be improved. I don't think there's anything wrong with investigating this. If everything turns out that everything was done correctly, everything was done properly in a timely manner, so be it. But if it does turn up something that could have been improved or wasn't handled correctly, then hopefully by doing this, it will correct it in the future. So I vote yes.
The motion passes 3 votes to 2.
Okay, Mrs. Grignani?
Be it resolved, all items listed with an asterisk are routine and non-controversial by the Township Council and will be approved by one motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless a council member so requests, in which case the item will be removed from the consent agenda and considered in its normal sequence on the agenda. Motion to approve the consent agenda by myself.
Second.
Motion made by Mrs. Grignani, seconded by Mr. DePiero. Roll call, Mr. DePiero?
Yes.
Ms. Grignani?
Yes.
Ms. McCarthy?
Yes.
Ms. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Carriffy?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Second.
Motion.
Motion made by Mrs. McCarthy, seconded by Mrs. Peterson. Roll call. Mr. DePiero?
Yes.
Ms. Grignani?
Yes.
Ms. McCarthy?
Yes.
Ms. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Carriffy?
Yes.
Motion passes. Have a great night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.